Welcome to Fighting Words, spiritual sparring for rank-and-file believers. I'm Brother Logan, Director of Education for the Hospitallers of St. Martin and co-creator of Gruntworks. Each week, I march us through the Sunday lectionary readings, dragging biblical interpretation back to rank-and-file believers where it belongs. Sometimes, I also interview companions along the way who are engaged in their own wrestling match with the Word. Thanks for joining us. Let's get it on. Exodus chapter 24, verses 12 through 18. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Come to me at the mountain, and enter there. I'll give you the tables of stone, the law and the commandments, which I have written to give them laws." And Moses rose up, and Joshua, his executive officer, they went up God's mountain. And to the elders they said, "Rest there till we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If anybody needs judgment, let them go to them." And Moses and Joshua went up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And Yahweh's glory came down upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the Lord called Moses on the seventh day out of the midst of the cloud. And the shape of Yahweh's glory was as burning fire on top of the mountain, before the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and went up to the mountain, and was there in the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Psalm 2. Therefore did all people rage, and the people imagine vain things. The kings of the earth stood up, and the rulers gathered themselves together against Yahweh and against his Christ, saying, "Let us break through their bonds, and cast away their burden from us." He that dwells in the heavens shall laugh scornfully. Yahweh is going to mock them. Then he'll speak to them angrily and stir them up in his fury. I have been established as king by him on Sion, his holy mountain, declaring the ordinance of the Lord. The Lord said to me, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask, and I'll give you all people for your inheritance, all the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. You shall crush them into pieces as earthenware." Let's be real clear, y'all kings. Show some discipline, and all y'all that judge the earth. Work under the Lord with fear, and rejoice in him while trembling. Take heed, lest the Christ's Son be angry, and you die on the path of righteousness, when his wrath suddenly burns. Lucky are all who trust in him. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 21. For we didn't follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Joshua Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." We heard this voice come out of heaven while we were with him on the holy mountain. We have had the more sound prophetic logic, and you would do well to heed it as a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star arises in your hearts. But more importantly, no prophetic text should be interpreted privately. No prophecy ever came by human will alone. Rather, God spoke through inspired people moved by the Holy Spirit. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. After 6 days, Joshua took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. He was metamorphosed in front of them. His face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as the light. Behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter answered and said to Joshua, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you want, let's make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While Peter was still speaking, behold, the shadow of a bright cloud came over them. Then a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the students heard it, they hit the ground in fear. Joshua came and touched them and said, "Get up, don't be afraid." Lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Joshua alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Joshua commanded them, saying, Don't tell anyone what you saw until the Son of Humanity has risen from the dead. Hello and welcome to Fightin' Words. This is Brother Logan Isaac broadcasting from the Chapter House in Albany, Oregon. This is a late recording. Transfiguration Sunday was last Sunday. It's also known as Epiphany, I want to say 6. I'm not sure. The readings today come to us from Exodus 24, Psalm 2, 2 Peter 1, and Matthew 17. There's a couple of things that really need to be pointed out that get lost when you don't, when you are trained to take these translations as unquestionable. I say that carefully because I have not been trained in Greek and Hebrew. I've had a keyword study Bible for going on 2 decades, and I reference the Strong's concordance numbers and Wiktionary and all the rest. So I say that because it's a really important point, not only to what I'm doing exegetically and theologically and hermeneutically, but also because I want to disclose, like, if you think I'm an expert, I'm not. And I say that because that's kind of the gift I bring, but also the problem. Gift and problem go hand in hand. That is part of my hermeneutic. I'll call it Christian pragmatism, and I'll maybe say more about that later. But I think that's a gift because I notice things that I'm not told whether or not I should notice. And because I have 2 research degrees, 2 master's degrees in theology, I kind of think I'm onto something, but I haven't been formed in a linguistic way that has told me this is the way you're supposed to do it. I haven't been sipping the same Kool-Aid. I have Kool-Aid, right? Everybody's sipping some Kool-Aid, but it's not quite the same flavor. And so that makes me not only see things differently from most interpreters, but also allows me to see things differently from most interpreters. So take that with a grain of salt. And that's the point, right? We're supposed to be salt of the earth. Anyway, so Exodus 24, we have the Transfiguration. In Greek, it's metamorphoeo. That's why I put metamorphosed, because apparently metamorphosized is like basketball ball. You're like, it's 2 different conjugations getting smashed together. Metamorphosed is very similar to metanoia, a changing or repentance and a changing of appearance. Metamorphoeo, I believe, has to do with the appearance. The appearance changed. But that's not really the most important thing. The most important thing for Exodus is that Moses and Joshua go up together. And then Moses goes up the mountain to talk to God for 40 days. And it appears as though Moses and Joshua are there for 6 days and 6 nights together on the mountain. And then that is when, so day 7 is when the glory of the Lord appears. And then potentially Moses goes into the cloud for 40 days, leaving Joshua there on the mountain for 40 days while Moses does the thing, comes back. Something to point out. Also, the Sinai mountain was the old site of worship for a moon goddess named Sina. Interesting point. But remember this is Joshua. Joshua and Moses are on the hill together. The hill of Sina, the moon goddess, that Yahweh is taking and saying, no, Sina is somewhere below me in the pantheon if there is one, and Joshua's there. Okay, so Psalm 2, we have a quote within the psalm, and the quote is the son, or the king installed by Yahweh, and I put scare quotes around king or melech, because we begin with the assumption, the existence of kings in the psalm. I believe that the Bible does something like mimetic commentary, and I do that knowing Girard and what he's done with mimesis and imitation and anthropology, which I think is great, but I think it's from a certain perspective that I don't share, and it's not only being a soldier, but like I'm not an apophatic theologian. I'm not trying to discover God by talking about what God is not or what God is getting us to avoid. I want to talk about what God is trying to get us to avoid, but I want to talk about the thing that God is trying to get us to do. So, mimetic commentary is my way of like naming what, again, is something that I've done and that I find help. It's something that I've done, and we'll call it satire. When I was a kid growing up in Southern California, not surfing, but bodyboarding, which is like the not cool thing to do, or it was back then, and surfers were real territorial. I liked this surfing brand named Lost. And in high school, I was going to youth group because I got arrested for shoplifting. I thought, oh, I'm supposed to go to church because I did it bad. This is how I get right. And I would take logos like Lost, and if you know it, you know it. If you don't, so what? And I would flip it around, and I would make it look the same, but I would say, and there's an ellipsis in front of Lost, ... Lost. And it was kind of like Creature skateboards. It was like glorying in the like, we're scoundrels, we're dirty, we have, we're not the most impressive, but, kind of like, like pigs rolling around in the dirt, like, look at us, we're having fun. Anyway, I'd roll it around and I'd make it in the same font. I would say found, the evangelical thing. And so that is what I'm calling satire. That's what I'm calling mimetic commentary. That's what I think Genesis is doing in contrast to the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, when they were in Babylon, beginning to understand what their beliefs are, given their inherited history of judges and kings. So Psalm 2 is taking what already exists. Kings are already there. And the Hebrew imagination says, well, kings were inherited, kings are adopted, kings don't really belong. They don't work in human polity as well as they should, or we would want them to. And so Yahweh takes kings and says, well, I have a king, and I have set them up on my holy mountain, which is at Zion. There's all these different holy mountains. But anyway, and the king is also, toward the end in verse 12, the Hebrew, the Masoretic text has bar, or ben. Actually, I got to double check. But it basically says, heed the sun in the Hebrew. In the Greek, it says, take heed or be educated. And the educated part is a conjugation of this word pays, paidonoeo, or something like that. But it's like, look, son, and it's a child reference. It's the same Greek word that Captain Marvel uses to say, my child, my son, my boy is sick. Pays. And so that's why you heard me say, take heed lest the Christ Son be angry, because the Christ Son is who is saying, I have been established as king, quote unquote king, blah, 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 and I'll give you the people for your inheritance and blah, blah, blah. So this is setting up the Transfiguration and what Christ does as the Son of God, who is the political figurehead that has been anointed and chosen by God. So getting into 2 Peter 1, this is Peter's narration of the Transfiguration. He says, we were there, and our logic, our logos, our words are more reliable because we were there. But notice who was there. In Matthew, it's Joshua, right? That's his anglicized name. There's no such thing as Jesus. Jesus is the same as Jesus, which is the 6th book of the Bible. So Joshua is up on a mountain with Moses and Elijah. Joshua and Moses were on the hill together for 6 days, remember? Same names, Joshua, Moses. And Elijah is important because he is the only person, Enoch possibly walked with God and didn't die, but the language is kind of obscure. Elijah is clearly stated. He went to heaven on a chariot and never died. He never experienced death. That's what makes Elijah important. He might come back. Who knows? Should we keep an empty chair for him at Passover and Seder's? Let's do it, because he might come back. He never died. He's still around here somewhere. So they're using Moses as God's chosen, Joshua as Moses' adopted son, kind of, sort of. Remember, Moses in Numbers 11 says, I'm going to have you be my assistant below me. You're going to be my boy. And I'm going to add the theonym in front of your birth name, Hoshea, and you're going to become Yahoshea. You're going to become Yahweh. You're going to be, Yahoshea or Yehoshua, Joshua. That's where Joshua gets his name in Numbers 11. So, you may think that Jesus is some new thing. No, Jesus is the same old thing done over again to try and get right. Same old religion, still trying to get it right. Moses and Joshua are joined by Elijah, and Elijah is a stand-in for God, the thing which never dies and was never born, right? But for us humans, we're all born. We cannot control being born. We don't seem to exist until we have language and can construct memories, and then we start learning. And see where I'm going with this? Like, Elijah is a symbolic carrier of Yahweh in a way that Moses and Joshua cannot be. And so the Transfiguration is not just some new thing. It may appear that way to Peter and to John and to James, but outside the story, right? Let's pretend that Peter and Matthew are real people who tried their best to remember what happened and put it to words to share with their community. But that being said, God is also an active actor in reality. God inspires Peter and Matthew and John and James. So God exists and is active both within these stories and in history, and therefore outside these stories that I'm looking at the text on the page. So, Transfiguration is a very important holiday. It's a very important reading because it's taking something that close enough to what we know and what we call history and is connecting it to something that was prescribal, right? The LXX, the Septuagint didn't exist. It wasn't just born from nothing. It was born on these Hebrew stories, some of which we know were recorded, like Judges 4 and 5. Like, that was a text that someone just put in Judges as like, this fits the story that we're telling. It's a story that has been told, and so this is where that story goes. Similarly, there's there's Psalms that use incredibly archaic Hebrew, and we know that those existed in writing and were preserved in writing before the Septuagint, even though we don't have any extant, which is to say existing, copies in Hebrew that predate the Greek Septuagint. So, if there's one thing that I'm doing, I am coming to these incredible texts of an insider community as an outsider. I'm not a Jew. I don't even think I'm a Christian if we accept that the institutional church, its boundaries are a given, right? I'm confirmed in the Episcopal Church, but the Episcopal Church does not seem to want anything to do with people like me, namely veterans. But I could be wrong. So I have this weird inward-outward thing, and this brings me back to Exodus and my closing point. In Exodus, the Greek language, the grammar is odd, because God, theos in Greek, is calling Moses inside of God. And I translate it here, but Yahweh said to Moses, "Come to me at the mountain." In the Greek, it's like, enter me at the mountain. The mountain is an envelope within which God ceases being public and becomes an intimate partner with Moses and, by extension, Joshua. Joshua stays outside the cloud, remember? They set up camp for 6 days, the cloud appears, then Moses goes for 40 days, comes back with the tablets. Joshua is kind of an outsider. Moses is the insider. And then that's flipped when Joshua gets to enter the promised land because he was brave with Caleb. And Moses, who wasn't so sure, who sided with those who led with fear instead of courage and curiosity, Moses doesn't get to enter the promised land. He is always an outsider. So if there is anything I think I'm saying comprehensively about theology, Christian, Jewish, whatever, Hebraic theology, it's that it messes with the inward-outward. It's a cycle. It keeps going back and forth. Joshua becomes the insider. Moses was the outsider, now is invited in Transfiguration. Like, this is the way of things. Think of it as like a magnet, right? The poles sometimes switch. The magnetic field around the earth may someday switch, and we may not even know or care, except that our compasses will always point south. And we'll just have to paint the other side to make it feel like they're still pointing north. So that is the mystery and the beauty and the detail of Transfiguration Sunday and the text that we read and the story it invites us into as outsiders. We are sinners, and yet God has invited us in. We've made mistakes, but we are allowed to experience the theory, the form of perfection. And that reminds me, we do get that in Greek, the shape of Yahweh's glory. In Greek, that's eidos. It sounds like idea. And this is what Aristotle says are forms. What are the shapes of things that are perfect in theory, but we can't actually find, right? A perfect square, a perfect circle, a perfect sphere, a perfect cube. They don't exist in reality, but they do exist in our minds. We can think of these things. We can grasp at perfection in theory, in our mind, even as we have to wrestle with these imperfect vessels we inhabit. Our spirit inhabits a body, and we cannot do one without the other. You are both spirit, filling spirit in corporeal and corruptible bodies, right? And so as I do continue first formation and fighting words, I'm not just doing the Bible, I'm also trying to unfold for myself and anybody who gives a shit to listen what my theology is. After 3 years of formal theological training, decades of experience and wondering and seeking, because I think I found a way to appreciate the nuance of both instead of trying to find a camp and like stake my flag there. Like, I don't know if I have a home. I don't know if Jesus did either, because that's not his name. And if we don't want to get to know him, we can keep calling him Jesus and pretend that the Old Testament and New Testament, quote unquote, are separate. But I think that's the first mistake we make when we anglicize or westernize Joshua. We're never going to fully comprehend and appreciate the Hebraic impulses inherent in the Greek text, the Masoretic text. I think if you want to know God, you have to go through this figure named Jesus, and you have to wrestle with the fact that his name is Joshua. And when you do that, that forces you to begin asking questions that a lot of other theologians either haven't asked or haven't wanted to ask. And I'm in the position of like being able to ask those questions, not relying on predetermined answers from my financial or economic security. I've been given the freedom, the politeia, the citizenship, the republic, the ability, the privilege, and the entitlement to ask these questions authentically and honestly and not be scared of what the answer might be. And I think that's both a blessing and a curse. Every opportunity, every tiny little power or privilege I have comes with a duty, a responsibility. And that's why I've said I'm doing this for me, and I am. But I also know that I've been through a lot of shit. And the fact that I'm still alive statistically is an anomaly. Most people like me that have experienced the shit that I have departed to be with Christ. And I'm still here because I don't think that's what people like me want. I don't think that's what other believers want. And I'm not dead. And so I'm going to keep asking these questions as much as I can, as pointedly as I can. And I appreciate everybody who's listening. I invite you to respond at Blue Sky or at Ghost. You can find me and engage with my work there, because I'm going to keep doing this for at least 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I'm going to have about half a Bible. Maybe I'll finish. I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell. Well, them's fighting words for this week. Support Gruntworks on Venmo with username PewPewHQ, or visit pewpewhq.com/TFW to collaborate, send prayer requests, or read more of the Fightin' Word, my exegetical project centering rank-and-file believers. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for federating the faith with me. This has been Brother Logan, Semper Fam.